Now I would like to look at some typical games played by very strong players using King's Indian attack. The first game I would like to look is game played by Bobby Fischer against at that time very strong player from Israel, Geller. It's not the Grandmaster Geller, but Uzi Geller. So game was e4, e6. As I said, as I mentioned before, King's Indian attack can easily start with e4 first move. d3, d5, knight d2, c5, g3, knight f6, knight f3, bishop e7, bishop g2, castle, and castle for white. Black played knight c6, all very typical moves. Rook to e1, queen to c7, and e5, just as we analyzed. After e5, black played knight to d7, and now white played queen e2, must protect the e5 pawn, and after queen e2, black played b5, starts queenside counterplay, h4, a5, knight f1. Well, here, of course, black could pursue by playing b4, and we're going to later look at some other game where you will see that black played b4. But in this position, in this game, black played knight d4. Knight takes d4, c takes d, and Fischer's move was bishop to f4, rook a6. And as we know, we already got the typical position with pawn on e5, where we have space advantage on a king side, and only plan here for white is to attack on a king side. And that's exactly what Fischer does. Plays knight h2, rook to c6, rook a to c1, and after rook to a to c1, bishop a6. Well, that allows tactical shot by white. Bishop takes d5. Now, Fischer did not have to play this move. Okay, the other option would have been knight g4 followed by h5, h6. But bishop takes d5 was played. E takes d. And e6. That was very temporary sacrifice of a piece. But now you see the black's queen is hanging, and also black's knight on d7 is hanging. So after e6, queen to d8, pawn takes to d7, and obviously now the bishop is on e7 hanging, so black must go rook e6, queen g4, and in this position black chose to play f5. Black did not like, maybe on queen takes d5, bishop e5 is strong. Maybe he was afraid of bishop e5. Maybe simply knight f3, and maybe king g2, pinning the rook. You see, we get out king g2. That rook cannot take on e1 with the check. So anyway, black played here f5 move before they took the pawn on d7, queen h5, queen takes d7, knight f3. Now this position already strategically lost for black. Now let me explain something. When you play King's Indian attack, you have a very strong threat of attacking on a king side. And black had to stop this attack. Now black does not have immediate danger of getting mated on a king side, but you see the e5 square is very weak, g5 square is weak, and black is definitely lacking the coordination. Bishop on a6 has nothing to do with position. Rook on e6 and bishop on e7 is misplaced because white wants to play rook takes e6 and rook to e1, taking over the e file. And all white's pieces you can see that coordinated on the king side. So position is already very bad. g6, queen h6, and bishop f6. Now rook takes e6, queen takes e6, and white played here bishop to e5. Now bishop takes e5. Well, what we need to do, why bishop e5 such a strong move? So what white needs to do to exchange dark square bishop, and if dark square bishops come off the board, you see the e5 and g5 squares gonna become very weak because light square bishop on a6 cannot protect them. So bishop e5, bishop takes e5, and rook to e1. f4 was played by the black. So what would happen on bishop g7? See what happens on bishop g7. White simply plays queen takes g7, king takes g7, and rook takes e6, getting decisive positional advantage. And well, with next move it's going to be also material advantage, and black is totally lost in this position. You see how using the king side attack threats white gained a huge positional advantage. So in this position black played f4, try to get some counterplay. Then rook takes e5, queen to d7, and now white went h5. And after f takes g, white played h takes g, g takes f, king takes f2, black played h takes g, and game ended in a couple of moves. Queen takes g6, now threatening to take bishop on a6. So black played queen g7. Now queen takes a6 is not good because queen takes e5. And this move ended the game. So white is threatening queen takes g7 checkmate. If black takes the queen, then rook takes g6 check, followed by rook takes bishop. So, and if black plays rook f7 in this position, rook f7, then simply white retreats its queen and wins black's queen. This is actually very simple, very well done, very clean game where white took advantage of all the ideas, all the basic ideas of the King's Indian attack. Now this game was played long time ago, obviously in 1968, but even then, well, the beauty of King's Indian attack is that ideas that were very popular and were basic ideas 30 or 40 years ago, they don't change because this opening is not being updated as frequently as many classical openings. So let's look at the other game. There is a game played by David Bronstein that was won by white in 15 moves against another very strong grandmaster at that time, German grandmaster Wolfgang Unzeker. So e4, e6, d3, d5, knight d2, knight f6. Actually, I remember Bronstein played this King's Indian attack against me in one of the USSR championships, and I had a very, very hard time drawing the game, and he had small advantage throughout all the game. So let's look at this game. Knight f3, g3, c5, knight f3, knight c6, bishop g2, bishop e7, and in this position castle, rook e1, b5, e5, knight d7, knight f1, a5, h4. That's exactly position, very close from the game we just looked a couple of minutes ago. And here black played b4 and white played bishop f4. It's interesting that game ended in like 3 moves here. After bishop f4, black played bishop a6 and knight g5. If you remember, if you watch closely the analysis of this variation, we said that we're going to go knight g5 with the idea of queen h5 to force black to make weaknesses, and then it's going to be easy for us to open a position of the black's king. So after knight g5, black played queen e8. Now this is an interesting move. So if white plays queen h5, which white did not play, black was intending to play bishop takes g5, and if pawn takes g5, now black would have played f5 move. It's interesting. This move disallows white to take en passant because the queen is hanging. White's queen is hanging, and you know en passant you cannot make on a second move. You have to do it right away. So that would have been some relief for black. So, but white played queen g4, and now this position is already very, very difficult because black has no plan. Of course, black could have lasted long time if they played king h8 or some move maybe like rook c8, but black made a blunder here and lost immediately. Black played a4 and resigned after knight takes e6. It's a very simple shot. You see the rook is hanging on f8, pawn on g7, queen takes g7, mate is threatening, and if black takes the pawn, then queen takes e6 check, followed by queen takes c6, and white has 2 extra pawns and easily won position. So this is maybe not very typical the way game ended, but it's very typical that black was under certain pressure. Normally when strong player blunders, or even any player, any reasonable player blunders in seemingly position that does not have immediate threat, that means they are under pressure, and pressure, well, frequently takes its toll. So let's look now another game. This game I like this game very much. It played by American Grandmaster, former Russian, Gregory Kaidanov, against another Dutch Grandmaster, Nieboyer. So e4, c5, knight f3, e6, d3, knight c6, g3, d5, knight d2, knight f6, bishop g2, bishop e7, castle, the castle, b5, rook e1, b5, e5, knight d7, knight f1, a5, h4. Well, we saw this position already in previous two examples. So this is kind of critical position. b4, bishop f4, a4. Now in this position, normally what I would do, I would go knight g5 followed with going with a general plan, but Kaidanov played a3. It's a matter of taste. I wouldn't do any move on a queen side without a need, but you cannot call this move a mistake, of course. Bishop a6, knight to h2, pawn c4. Now black tries to open some position, some files on the queen side, but of course white goes d4, c3, b takes c, b takes c. So just to show you what I meant, why I wouldn't play a3, if pawn was on a2, after c3 we could have gone b3, keeping whole position closed. But when black played c3, white played b takes c, and black played b takes c. This is position, and now white goes knight g5. That's the typical pattern in this position. That's a correct move, and that's now white starts creating serious threats. After knight to g5, black has to envision that queen h5 and how they want to protect the h7 pawn, by taking the knight or by playing h6. So when knight g5 was played in this position, knight b6, black is heading with knight on c4. After knight b6, queen h5. Now here it comes, and now black chose to take the knight on g5, bishop takes g5, and queen to e8. Again, they want to play f5 and try somehow relieve the pressure. But after bishop f6, it's not a difficult move, it's a simple move, but at the same time it's a decisive move. Now white seals black's king protection. So white seals black's king side pawns. After bishop f6, the position is totally lost for black. Black played knight takes d4. Now what would have happened if black just took? I think what would have happened here, white has a wide variety of choices. E takes f is one choice, and the attack is unbearable. So white has, I'm sure white has here more than one forced win. So what black has, you can check it with the computer, and computer will show you exact outcome, how many ways white has to win after g takes f. Knight takes d4 was played, and after knight takes d4, knight to g4, knight to f5, queen to g5, king to h8, bishop takes g7, knight takes g7, and knight f6. This is all over now. Queen h6 is coming, and queen is hanging on e7. Black played queen d8, queen h6, queen takes f6, queen takes f6, and black is absolutely unconditionally lost here. There is no possible way they can stop the mating attack. So after this, black resigned, and a couple of moves later they played rook e8, g4, knight d7, queen f4, bishop c4. Now black is material down, they're also under severe attack. h5, rook c8, rook a to b1, f5, e takes f, and black resigned here. Okay, now we saw this typical knight g5 just as I explained, so that's the way we will open black's king position. And no matter what black does in that position, when white plays knight g5, white has very strong attack. The secret here is to perform it correctly and to get it work. And it will work if you do it the right way, if you play it the right way. Let's look at a couple of other games. They are slightly different. Because black deviated. E4, E6. Those are actually interesting games because it has a little different pawn structure there. Actually, it started with knight f3, knight f6, g3, d5, bishop g2, e6, castle, bishop e7, d3, c5, knight d2, knight c6, e4. Well, as you see, it's with the move transposition we came to the same position, just as I mentioned on a theoretical part of this DVD that you can get King's Indian attack with the first move e4 with knight f3, but position they can merge. Now b6. That's another plan I mentioned also, that black may be able to play that. Rook e1, bishop b7. And in this position, I suggested e takes d, as you remember. Now on e takes d, we go d4, and on knight takes d5, I suggested either knight c4 or d4 anyway, and after cd, knight b3. Now, and again, I stay by these suggestions. This is a very interesting suggestions and worth playing. However, with white was a very strong grandmaster, Morozevich, Alexander Morozevich from Russia. He chose different plan, which is of course perfectly fine as well. c3, queen c7, and now he played knight to f1. After knight f1, you see white does not play e5 because does not let black to play knight d7, then castle long and go for g5 on bishop f4. So if black does not castle, we do not push e5. After knight f1, that's what happened. Now d takes e, and rook d8. I don't like this plan for black. Black could have, I think, at least in this position, they could have castled first, long side. But now, after d takes c, they cannot castle, so they played rook d8, queen to e2. Now black castled and white played e5. You see, as soon as black castled, white played e5. Just as I mentioned now, after e5, knight has to move from f6. So what was played here is knight d7 probably is the best move in this position, because what are the other options? Knight d5. From d5, knight does not have any square it can go to. So knight d7 was correctly chosen, and now white has to make a plan. White still has a problem defending the pawn, so they went bishop f4. They have to defend the pawn. They went bishop f4, and here after bishop f4, black played a6, knight to e3, b5. Obviously taking on e5 is not good because knight takes, and now simple knight g4 or even bishop takes b7 will just win the game. So black didn't take this pawn on e5, and now they are having serious problem, because they have no counterplay on a queen side, and knight g4 is coming, and all white pieces will be attacking black's king position. So black has already very serious problems. After knight e3, black played b5, knight g4, queen to c8. Well, simply because they don't have any useful moves. The idea of queen c8 is that now white has a threat of playing knight f6 check. You see, if pawn takes f6, then pawn takes f6, attacking the black's queen, and now bishop is hanging on e7, and after bishop d6, maybe some kind of move knight g5 followed by queen h5. That will be very dangerous for black. So just to avoid these threats in the future, black simply took the queen out of that diagonal. Black played simply queen c8, h4, rook f to e8, knight g5. Here we go. Again, same idea, knight g5, but now the knight on g4 is on the way. So white normally would have played queen h5, but you cannot jump over the knight. But there is another way to attack the h7 square, by playing to queen to c2. Now after knight g5, black in this position played 18th move, knight to f8, protecting the h7 pawn. After knight to f8, h5, and black played h6. Now white went knight e4. You see, white has very big space advantage. They have good chances to attack on king side. Black has zero counterplay. Now after knight to e4, 20th move, knight e4, knight h7. Now what white has to do, just start preparing the sacrifice on h6. White played queen e3, black played rook d5. Now white plays knight d2, attacking the rook on d5, rook to d7. Finally, bishop takes h6, pawn takes h6, and knight e4. Now, intuitively, for a grandmaster of Morozevich's level, he already knew that he is winning the game, because queen takes h6 is coming, and then knight f6. There is no way that black can protect its king position. So black desperately playing f5, e takes f, and now bishop f8. Knight takes h6. Now, normally when grandmaster sacrifices the piece in this position, they don't see all the way through. But that's where intuition kicks in. And right now, white has 3 pawns for a piece, for a missing piece, with continuing very strong attack. Bishop takes h6, queen takes h6, rook f8, knight to d6. Now this is an interesting move, because attacking queen, obviously black cannot take the knight because of queen g7 checkmate. After knight to d6, black still made a few moves. They played queen c7, queen g6 check, king h8, knight takes b7, and knight to e5. Well, if queen takes b7 after rook takes e6, the spin is deadly on diagonal and white is easily winning. So they made a couple of more moves and black resigned. Very well played by white. And I should tell, we could see that all the games we saw so far, white had overwhelming position right after the opening. That's what makes this opening is very sneaky. It looks like you develop very passively, but then all of a sudden you get very strong attack that black is not able to stop. So that's well. Now we will now look at another game that's also played by another Greek grandmaster Nikolaidis. Knight f3, d5 actually, g3, knight f6. That's another way to transpose to get to that position. Bishop g2, e6, castle, bishop e7, d3 castle, knight bd2, c5, e4, knight c6, rook e1, b5, e5, knight d7, knight f1, a5, h4. We saw this position already 3 times, and as you see, this is like a standard way to play for white. Now after a5, black's a5, white played h4, and now black goes b4. Knight 1 to h2, bishop a6. Now here, the reason I bring this game, and I want to show you this game, the normal moves are here, bishop f4 and knight g5. I don't like white's choice, which was h5, but we're going to see that even by playing, this is incorrect move. Even playing like this, white still got very good position. After h5, a4, again white played a3, b takes a, and b takes a, rook to b8, bishop f4, rook to b2, queen to c1, queen to b6, and here knight g4. Again, white wants to start building position, building attack here on the king side. After knight to g4, knight d4, knight takes d4, pawn takes d4. And now after pawn takes d4, now this position is in my opinion is clearly better for white, because they can simply go h6, g6 and bishop g5, weakening the dark squares against the dark squares on the king side. So in this position, what happened that white played bishop g5. Bishop takes g5, queen takes g5. And now obviously black must play f6. Well, without f6 they cannot survive. If rook takes c2, then white wins very quickly after knight f6 check, attacking the knight on d7. Knight takes f6, pawn takes f6, and after g6, queen h6. Black gets checkmated. So obviously the f6 is the forced move, but now e takes f, knight takes f6, and h6. You see black's king side is torn apart. So that's the tip. Well, king side is always very very important to be protected, especially if you castle there. And white has too many pieces attacking on the king side, not to mention weakness on e6 and bad bishop on a6 and distracted rook on b2. So white is totally winning here. So queen c7, rook takes e6, and knight takes g4, rook to e7, and position is totally lost for black. Black played queen takes e7, white played bishop takes d5 check first, and after king h8 queen takes e7, this obviously ends the game. There is too many mate threats. Queen takes f8, queen takes g7, and black resigned. Now, what I want to mention about these games is white played in none of these games. White did something extraordinary and any brilliances. No, there was simple common sense and believing strongly and playing logically and methodically and consistently, building attack on a king side against black's king. That's the and results show you how powerful the white's attack is on king's side. So I would recommend you to play the king's Indian attack more frequently, and you're gonna learn a lot about this opening and about the chess a lot too, because there's a lot of strategy and tactics involved there as well. So I strongly recommend you to play this and to use it in a tournament practice. If you have any questions, obviously we couldn't cover every possible variation black can play, but once we know the general plans, you should not have any problems playing it. And if you have any questions, you can always contact me and I will do my best to help you. Thank you very much.